Okay, guys, we're gonna start. Um, Firstly, hello from everyone, the SCOME and the SCOF national team. This is basically a webinar for all of you local officers, and we're going to talk about the activity. We're going to show you the material, and we're going to explain the different topics that we're going to cover in the activity. SCOF is going to start first, and then SCOME national officers will follow. So I'll start presenting the screen. Arpita, you're starting. अच्छा ठीक है वन सेकंड Can you see it?
Yeah.
Perfect.
So, sure. So, hi guys. Thank you for joining us this evening. We will talk about the activities is called pandemic, and so we'll be dealing. Me and Salman will be dealing with the mental health aspect of the pandemic, whereas Nishant and Koshla will be dealing with the academic aspect. Uh, I'd like to keep it a little interactive, so you guys can reply in your chat box whenever I ask a question. So, Kosha, let's start. So the COVID pandemic has pushed the world into a mental health crisis. We now have people working from home. There's a lot of people who are temporarily or permanently unemployed. Children are being homeschooled. There's lack of physical contact with our friends, with our family members, and all of this has led to a lot of stress in people. And adding to all that stress throughout the past couple of months is the constant information epidemic or pandemic that has fueled the situation more. So there is information and there's misinformation, and you don't know what to believe, and that constantly adds to the anxiety to the situation. Along with that, we've also seen a lot of incidents of racism, stigmatization, and xenophobia against particular communities, both in our own country as well as in other countries across the world. Uh,
Yeah.
Now, the mental health risks that we see due to social isolation have been categorized as acute panic attacks, wherein people complain of choking sensations, breathlessness, they can't feel, there's tingling and numbness of your limbs, uh, lightheadedness, there's nausea, vomiting, stuff like that. People have anxiety, which could again be a more anxiety is a generalized state of heightened, stress where something very small leads to an exaggerated stressful response in your body. That is anxiety. Obsessive behaviors. A lot of people, because they've heard that the virus spreads through this, through that. So they've indulged in a lot of excessive behaviors throughout the lockdown. There's a lot of hoarding. People have been hoarding a lot of things, food items. We saw in a couple of countries people hoarding toilet papers and stuff like that. So basic necessities. Medicines also have been hoarded by a lot of people. Then there's this, entire air of paranoia and depression. Yes, Upasana, the PPT will be available to you later. Don't worry. And there's also this somber mood of depression where everybody is just very fatigued, very low on energy because our entire system has been uprooted. Uh, Kosha. To give you some facts, according to the findings published in the Journals of Psychiatry Research, there has been a rapid rise in unemployment cases during the pandemic, and that has also coincided with a spike in suicide rates in several countries, including our own. Along with that, a recent survey, which was conducted by the Indian Psychiatry Society, has highlighted a sudden rise in patients suffering from some sort of mental illness. Started reporting one or more symptoms of mental illness. According to a survey which was conducted in late March, known as the Field COVID survey, 30 more than 33% people had significant psychological impact due to the coronavirus pandemic and the lockdown? Is it better now? Uh, and all these studies have found that the impact of all of these, of the pandemic, of the lockdown, has been significantly more in females as compared to males. Now, I'd like you guys thoda piche jao, Kosha. I'd like you guys to think about who are the population at risk that you think are the people who are affected more due to the pandemic, due to the lockdown. I want to see some answers. Okay, frontline workers, students, people living alone, daily wage workers, children, senior citizens. Yes, caregivers, absolutely. Doctors, somebody said already people suffering from mental disorders. Yes, perfect. Thank you. Kosha, Ardu. So yeah, so the population groups at risk are children, the elderly, women in the house who suddenly have this enormous workload to deal with, caregivers, and patients with chronic illnesses, not necessarily mental illnesses, but an underlying chronic illness, say like diabetes, cancer, tuberculosis, stuff like that. Next. Yes, Paki, everybody is suffering. Along with that, marginalized communities, frontline workers, daily wage workers, differently abled people, along with victims of domestic violence, have been affected. Rural population per country has been seen to be more affected than the urban population. So, a report by the ICMR showed that 1 out of every 7 individuals in India already suffers from a mental health concern. And most of the studies during this pandemic and previous pandemics and epidemics has shown that anxiety, panic, depression are the predominant manifestations during pandemic. Quarantine is a stressful time in itself, and that adds to the psychiatric morbidity and mortality in many ways. So we need to adapt to these lifestyle changes, and we need to manage the fear uh, and to be able to cope with the situation better. And it has been seen that people with an underlying mental health condition have more difficulty than the general population in dealing with these stressful conditions. And so the relapse rates of pre-existing mental health conditions is seen to be higher during the pandemic and the lockdown situation. Usha. So if we were to have a second wave of the virus, even though we're not really done with the first wave in India, but if going forward we have something very similar in the future, then we'd see that there will be an exacerbation of obsessive compulsive symptoms in people. There'll be increased stress level and depressive symptoms in people who are already prone to developing these conditions. There'll be precipitations of feelings of fear, anger, anxiety, panic about the worst possible outcome, loneliness, guilt. Uh, Renewed severity in some people can be so severe that it can lead to a post-traumatic stress disorder and even suicidal thoughts in people. Relapses can be seen in people with bipolar disorders, schizophrenia. So these are people who are already at such high risk that adding any amount of extra stress on these people is just opening a bag of worms. And then people also have severe withdrawal symptoms, especially people who are in, people who are habituated to taking drugs and alcohol. And I think Salman's gonna take over from now, and he's going to tell us about what we can do both at the individual and what the government of our country has done to ensure that the mental health of the people of the country is looked after.
Thank you so much, Arpita. Am I audible?
Huh.
Okay, perfect. Kusha, next slide, please. So, as far as coping with stress and mental health issues and anxiety during the COVID-19 outbreak is concerned, um, you need to realize that it's normal to feel sad or stressed or confused or a concoction of many emotions within you during this difficult time. And the least you can do now is you can talk. You can talk to the people who you trust. You can talk to your family. You can talk to your friends or even acquaintances for that matter. If um, you want someone to help you out, you must be staying at home right now. So, the least you can do is maintain a healthy lifestyle, not restricted to just diet, sleep, exercise, but also being in touch with your loved ones at home and your friends via email and WhatsApp and other social media accounts. Another thing is that you need to get your facts very clear. Gather information that will help you accurately, determine your risk so that you can take reasonable precautions. Find a credible source such as WHO website or the Ministry of Health and Family Welfare website or a local or a state public health agency. Limit your worry and agitation by lessening the time that you and your family spend watching or listening to media, because it can get very overwhelming and the coverage can be very upsetting for you. Um, Keep yourself informed by listening to advice and recommendations from your national or local authorities. Follow trusted news channels. Update yourself with verified news. Uh, Keep yourself up to date with the latest news from WHO on social media. Um, Again, keep up with the personal hygiene. Eat healthy meals at regular times. Exercise regularly. Allocate time for your work and time for resting. Uh, Also, make time for doing things you enjoy doing. Um, be aware of how much time you spend in front of a screen every day. Make sure that you take regular breaks from on-screen activities. Um, while I'm assuming most of you must be um, you're playing video games as well. So video games is in a way uh, a means to relax, but at the same time, it can be very tempting to spend much more time on the video games. Be sure to keep the right balance between video games or online activities and offline activities in your daily routine. As far as social media is concerned, use your social media accounts to promote positivity and helpful stories. And make sure you correct misinformation whenever you see it. If you are able to, or if you're able to help or offer support to people in your community or your friends or family, make sure you do that. Be it helping your neighbors with grocery shopping or listening to someone who's in need. Um Support health workers, because we all know they are risking themselves to respond to such a critical situation right now. And do not discriminate, because fear is a normal reaction in such situations of uncertainty. And sometimes fear can be expressed in some ways which are hurtful to other people. Remember to be kind. Do not discriminate against people because of your fears of the spread of COVID-19. Do not discriminate against people who you think might have coronavirus. Do not discriminate against healthcare workers because they obviously deserve our respect and gratitude. And also, COVID-19 has not only affected people in our country, but also other countries across the globe. So do not attribute it to any specific group. Next slide, Kosha. So just as you recognize your own mental health problems, make sure you are sensitive to such problems in your near and dear ones too, which includes changes in sleep patterns, difficulty in sleeping and concentrating, worsening of your health issues, increased use of alcohol, tobacco, or drugs, which may precipitate substance abuse, and be supportive to them. Um, and if these problems persist, please make sure to contact a helpline or contact your doctor or a mental health professional. Um, Next slide, please. Again, irritability and restlessness, or recklessness and impulsive behavior, loss of energy or fatigue, extreme mood swings, feelings of worthlessness are some of the problems which you can recognize. Next slide. Um, so In the aftermath of the COVID-19 outbreak, the Medical Council of India has issued guidelines for practicing telemedicine. And it's a welcoming step which establishes the basic purpose, the guideline, and the protocol of telemedicine. Also, the government of India has also launched various helplines pertaining to counseling in association with other prominent helpline numbers as well. So, to help citizens maintain their mental health, a set of videos were also curated by the government, which were uploaded on YouTube. One of them is on yoga for stress management, the other one is based on meditation, and an audio visual for managing mental stress and depression during the lockdown. And a helpline number has been started by the National Institute of Mental Health and Neurosciences, NIMHANS Bengaluru, in association with the Ministry of Health and Family Welfare. Next slide. So, WHO's advice for healthcare workers and in a way for future healthcare workers like us is that stress is normal and feeling under pressure is a very likely experience for all of us. And it's quite normal to be feeling this way in the current situation. So, the stress and the feelings associated with COVID-19 and the current situation are by no means a reflection of, what can we do or what we cannot do. And it does not determine that we cannot do our job or we are weak. Okay, so managing your mental health and psychosocial well-being at this time is as important as managing your physical health. Avoid using unhelpful coping strategies such as use of tobacco, alcohol, or any other drugs. In the long term, these can worsen our mental as well as physical well-being. And some of our healthcare workers may unfortunately experience avoidance by their family or community owing to the stigma and fear surrounding. So this can be very challenging, and this can make the situation more difficult. So, if possible, make sure you stay connected with your loved ones, turn into your colleagues, your superiors, and your other trusted persons for social support, because everyone is going through this together. And the post-COVID landscape can be a fertile breeding ground for stress, anxiety, depression, alcohol dependence, self-harm, PTSD, and it can lead to an overall rise in morbidity, suicides, and a number of disability-adjusted life years linked to mental health. And providing psychological first aid and counseling are quintessential during an epidemic like COVID-19 or any other pandemic for that matter. And hopefully, this is the only pandemic our generation gets to experience. So, hence, to summarize everything, it's very important to take care of our mental health, number one. Number two, gather accurate information. And number three, take precautionary measures to maintain our mental health in this difficult time. So that's about mental health. Now, thank you so much. Now the floor is for Kosha and Nishant.
Great, guys. Okay. So, can you guys hear me? Just send in a thumbs up. Acha, perfect, perfect. So, I have a few questions before I start. So, how many of you have been have your colleges already started online learning for you guys? So it can be the lectures or it can be any kind of case. Yeah, I see. Okay, started. Yes, yes. Okay, great. So when you are experiencing this as a student, what do you think are some of the advantages you are facing right now for the study pattern to change into online learning? What are some of the advantages? You can sleep. No, that's not what I'm talking about. Okay. Travel time is reduced. Okay. Can do it on your own time. Yeah, you can manage your own time. Guys, concentrate better. Okay. You don't have a timetable. Okay. So, comfort at home, focus, read anytime. Okay. So, And what are some of the disadvantages? Because I saw a lot of people stating that they don't really think this system works for them. Can't focus. Okay. No peers. No interaction. Okay. No practicals. That's true. Postings. Yeah, exactly. Okay. Too much screen time. Okay, great, great, great. So basically, when talking about impact of online learning on academics, this is what mainly we're going to talk about. Firstly, there has been a paradigm shift to digital space because of which many educators have to adapt to the technology. You would have also seen there are so many teachers who really do not know how to go about all of these applications, and it's very difficult for them to on their side. So some of the advantages that you guys also stated was you can save time and you can manage your own time. It is very flexible. Then you can actually see topics that you're really interested in and can pay more attention to them if there are any videos available online. Then there can be you can rewatch the same lecture again. So that is also a really good thing if the topic is really difficult. There are interactive sessions. If there are interactive sessions that occur in your college with the teachers, because we do have some tutorials in my college, personally speaking. So those are also really fun. But with those, yeah, I agree. There are so many drawbacks because the medical training that we call clinical postings in our country, that is something that really cannot be replaced with online learning. Personally speaking, at least. And learning about cases online, yeah, it does give us some kind of education, but then practicality of the same does change because you are not really meeting the patient in person. Then there are so many places where disruptions can occur by other students too, and that can also hamper your experience of online learning. And yeah, so that's pretty much it. And then there is not open communication at many places, and many teachers would want to prefer a one-way communication. So that also creates a problem. So what do we do? So one thing that we can do is gear up for at-home productivity, because I agree there is due to the pandemic happening also, and your schedules being very different from your the schedules that you are okay with. There is a lack of motivation that occurs, and you need to really understand how to be more productive at home. And this is something that we can work on together. So, what can you do to stay productive? Then, here, what you can do is you can dedicate a study space in your rooms or in your house, anywhere in your house. You can dedicate a space where there is no distraction. You don't use any kind of phones. If you use a laptop, that's great for studying, but then, except for that, you would avoid other electronics. Then get comfortable, but not too comfortable, obviously. And then we keep it well stocked with snacks or some kind of chocolates. You can even reward yourself while you're studying and keep the whole area to be positive. Then is establishing a routine. Now, establishing a routine, some of you guys would have obviously been complaining that you have lost your sleep cycle in the whole pandemic, and that's so true. I totally agree. But then, with the same, we really need to understand that establishing a routine to make sure that we don't lag back on our study is something that is very important to make sure that like you are doing the most out of your pandemic, because you have a ton of time to cover so many topics theoretically at least. So you can make a list, you can start early, you can structure your day to dividing it in the ratio of like 1:2. If every hour you study, every 2 hours you study, you do 1 hour of say watching some videos or watching just recreation. Then you can make the timetable flexible, but then there is I had also read about this. So some people do follow a system where they start early, they'll study for 4 hours continuously, and then they'll take a break, and then after the break's over, they'll again study for 4 hours continuously. Now this is something that will not resonate with everyone, I agree, because there are people who would say that their span of concentration is not that long. So you can cater your routine to whatever you prefer, but please make sure that you find a routine in the whole pandemic, because that is something that is going to that's going to make sure that you have a study pattern that is very effective. So apart from that, you can structure. So what you can do is you can specify what kind of chapters or what kind of topics will you cover in that study section, prioritize. Then you can basically um, use timers, because timers are, you really don't know how productive you are until you use a timer. Because I have personally also experienced, I feel I'm very slow, but then when on a timer, it does it makes sure that there is more output out of the same amount of time, because there's the pressure of completing that much amount of content in that much time. Then there's dedicated social time. Obviously, you need to get out of that zone, spend some time with your family, talk to your friends online. You can any kind of recreational activity is good. Then, how many of you have been part of virtual study groups? I want to know about that. Has anyone been a part of any virtual study groups? Yes or no, both work. Guys, I see no one in the chat box. Can you guys hear me?
कोचा they are typing.
अच्छा अच्छा.
देख हो गया.
I think it's my internet. Yeah, great. Low mobile data. Okay. I see a few people who are a part. I see some who are not. Okay. So basically, creating a virtual study group is something that will really help out people who have been accustomed to actually be group study workers. So basically, if you have been doing group study while you were in college and you want to substitute that, you can really join in a virtual study group. Like, you can, as local officers within yourselves also, you can try to form a virtual study group amongst people who are interested, and then you can use Skype, you can use Google Hangouts, Google Meet to make sure that everyone is studying at the same time, and you can just switch on your video cameras, switch off your mics, and then study together. And if you're not comfortable around many people, what you can do is on YouTube, you can just search study with me videos, and then you can put them on the background. So you can study while that is happening too. So basically, what the whole process will be is just to prioritize on 4 main things. That is, have a study space, have a routine. If you prefer, make a study group, and make sure that you practice a healthy lifestyle, because we are keeping our food habits and our health at the back right now in the pandemic, and I have seen that amongst many students as well. So you need to prioritize these things. And so guys, what kind of resources do you use for online learning? Have you come across any courses, any websites, any YouTube playlists that are really good while you're studying, like any kind of educational resources? Okay, I see Osmosis, I see Marrow, I see Telegram, I see Speed Pharmacology, Kaplan, Sketchy is great. Coursera, yeah, Najib. That's great. So quite a lot of you guys actually know about all of these resources. That's really good. So I'm just going to talk about a few that you might not know about, and you can really use them. There's VirtualDx, which is providing decision support system for differential diagnosis testing and therapeutic decisions. Then there's Amboss. Amboss you might know about, because we at MSI also have been doing a lot of events with them. They provide online courses, and they have COVID material for students too, so you can get to know more about COVID. Then there's Lecturio. Lecturio also is a partner with IFMSA, and we all get 14 days of free access to Lecturio. You can use that too. Then there's Insimo, which is another partner with IFMSA. They even have recently had a international diagnostic championship, so you guys can participate in that too. Then there's Body Interact, which is clinical scenarios. They give you clinical scenarios about COVID-19 virtual patients. You basically need to understand how to manage a patient. So right now, considering the pandemic and you cannot go to your postings, this is a really good resource to use. And for Indian curriculum especially, there are quite a few online resources that are available. So as some of you mentioned, there's Marrow, there's Prep Ladder, then there is Dr. Mentors, there's MedCampus. There are quite a lot. Then there are recorded lectures which have been uploaded by Maharashtra University of Health Sciences. So if you want to get access to these, you can just type MUHS learning on YouTube, and you find a whole YouTube channel that they have created, and they have made playlists according to the subjects that are available. So you can just choose the subject that you want to know, and each video has a title, which is the topic that they're covering, and you can get access to it via YouTube. It's that simple. Then there's MediMagic, and this is by Rajiv Gandhi University of Health Sciences, along with Karnataka government, as a source of online learning for all students. So these are some of the resources that you can use. And the World Health Organization, you would know about WHO courses. WHO has provided free online courses, quite a lot on COVID too, that you can use. Coursera had been offering quite a few courses for free. The last time I checked, there were 85 courses, out of which I think 30 to 35 courses were medicine and allied subjects related, that they were offering for free during the pandemic for all students to participate in. So you can definitely look up those courses on Coursera, and there are other courses that are paid, or you can use those obviously too. Then there's Harvard Medical School, which provides online courses related to health sciences, and then there's Kaplan and Amboss lectures, and these really help you in the preparation of various competitive exams like USMLE, PLAB, and other country exams. So I think that's pretty much my time. I would hand it over to Nishant now.
Yes. Okay, guys. I hope you have not been bored right now. And I'll just talk about what pandemic preparedness is and how you, as a medical student, need to be prepared. So, Kosha, am I audible? Can someone send a thumbs up? Okay, perfect. So I'll just ask three to four questions, and we'll keep it very interactive. So, do you know what pandemic preparedness is? Just write yes or no in the chat box. No, no, no. Yes. Okay. Okay, great. Most of you are not aware of what pandemic preparedness is, so that's all right. Do you think pandemic preparedness is for everyone, or is it only for doctors, or only for government, or only for policymakers, or is it for general population? Is pandemic preparedness important for general population? Okay, great, great. Badhiya. Okay, Kosha, next slide. Somewhat. Okay. Pandemic preparedness. So, what is pandemic preparedness or pandemic planning? So, you should not wait, or we should not wait for a pandemic to start. Okay. So, we should have some planning or some preparedness at the start. And this preparedness should be followed or should be incorporated by all the sections of the society, all the local people, all the channel members, all the doctors, all the students, all the government officials, everyone you see, they have pandemic preparedness, or say not even pandemic, like don't take the example of COVID-19, say epidemic or say an endemic. So you should, or we should all be prepared for these things, and we, especially as medical students, we need to be prepared for this, as we all know that we are facing such a crisis right now, and somewhere or the other our preparedness level is not up to the mark. That's why we are facing many problems like lack of online education, or say other lack of practical means of examination, or lack of postings. So somewhere or the other our preparedness was not up to the mark. So what to do during this pandemic, and how to prepare for this, and why is it important? So as I said, all levels of the society, be it at local, at national, or at a regional or a global level, should be prepared for response to the pandemic. So it should not happen that say India is prepared for pandemic and say China is not prepared for pandemic, or say Australia is not prepared for a pandemic. It is a pandemic after all, so it affects every nation, every country. So at all levels. So even at my level, at my city level, we should be prepared, as well as at the country level, we all should be prepared, as well as at the when you see all the countries as a whole, like at the world level, at the global level, we should all be prepared. And it should be integrated process. It should not be that we are following some different procedure at local level, and there's some different operating protocols at national level, and there are some different operating protocols at international level. So the pandemic preparedness should be integrated into the regional, national, and the local plans, in the disaster management plans basically, and it should be processed and restructured such that it should be included in your disaster management plans. So what are the disaster management plans, or what are these plans? These plans include 3 steps, which are readiness, response, and recovery. So during a disaster or after a disaster, a government should plan prior to the disaster. One should not happen like there's a fire somewhere and the government is planning now that, oh, we need more fire engines, or we need more firemen. It should not be like that. So there should be readiness. There should be response. So if there's a fire somewhere, there should be effective communication and there should be a response. Yes, the fire trucks are on their way. Yes, the firemen are on their way. And the third option is recovery. So after the fire, those who are people who are stuck there, they should be recovered from that building or that place. So these three steps are important for disaster management, that is readiness, response, and recovery. So pandemic preparedness should also be planned according to these 3 R's. Readiness, we should be ready for any pandemic. Like you couldn't imagine in January or February that a pandemic would occur, or no one had predicted in February that we would be doing this, like these activities or these webinars online. So we should be ready for any condition. We should have a prompt response to any pandemic or any epidemic. I know it is very hard for a country like India because of our geographical location and because of the extent of the country and the length of the country, the population. The response is hard. That's why we need to integrate it at a regional, at a national level, at the local level itself. So if the national teams are not able to respond as promptly, the local team should cover up for the responsiveness. And recovery. So recovery is like one of the most important phase of pandemic preparedness. So you may ask that pandemic preparedness is followed locally, regionally, nationally, and globally. So who should prepare these responses, or who should be responsible to prepare these operating guidelines? Or you may have heard the word SOPs in the news. It is like very fad right now, that SOP or awareness techniques or technical awareness. What are these techniques and who prepare them? So the government of India or any central government of the country is given the task of preparing clear guidelines, and these guidelines should be spread out to local communities, and all the planning procedure should be made by government, the central government, which is in charge of the country, including planning assumptions and all the available data which they have. They should make the assumptions as well, and according to the 3 R's, readiness, response, and recovery, they should make such preparedness and assumptions, and they should make a standard operating procedure or SOPs. So what are SOPs? These SOPs are a list of rules, or you can call them rules, which a government decides to follow during a pandemic. It will constitute of all the 3 R's. It will have rules for readiness, it will have rules for response, it will have rules for recovery. And these SOPs, although these are made by general government or the central government, these are distributed to the local and the regional governments so that they can make some changes accordingly. Say for example, the central government of India issues an SOP, which is in, say, I'm seeing a very basic example, which is in English. But say in Maharashtra, there are many people who are not able to understand English, so the local dialect. So what the central government needs to do is it needs to incorporate these standard procedures, standard operating procedures, and share it with the local community so that they can make the changes according to the guidelines. They should not go beyond the guidelines. And by preparing such SOPs, they are helping the common man understand what these SOPs are, and they can help them implement them. The government should identify and protect vulnerable groups who tend to be overlooked. So you might have seen that migrant laborers are not being looked upon, or there is unemployment, and the vulnerable groups such as the refugees or disabled persons or people who are in prisons. These people are generally overlooked during the pandemic, or not even in the pandemic. Say if there's some disaster, so these people are generally overlooked. So what a government should do is they should first identify these people, and they should protect these people. So once they identify such people, they know what resources are going to be required to protect such a vulnerable group of people. So how to protect people, or how to effectively prepare during a pandemic, or how to have effective planning? There's only one main thing, which is a detailed communication strategy. So a government should develop a detailed communication strategy, not during a pandemic. Say if there's a COVID-19 pandemic, or say if there's an influenza pandemic right now, the government should not prepare a detailed communication strategy right now. It should have a detailed communication strategy prepared before the pandemic, that is known as readiness. So it should have a detailed communication strategy. The communication strategy should have been well tested before, so that the government knows that it is foolproof. And if we can communicate through these channels or through these strategies, we'll be able to identify the vulnerable groups, identify all the problem and response quickly, and also help recover. So the communication strategy is the most important thing for any pandemic preparedness. Next slide, please. Okay, so how as you as a medical officer should be prepared for pandemic, or say you are a doctor right now, or you will become a doctor right now. So how you should take such steps for pandemic preparedness. Say you are in a hospital setting, in an institute setting, and obviously you as a doctor are a frontline worker and have a say. So how you should be prepared and how a medical officer should be prepared. So the first and the foremost thing, which everyone knows, which is leadership. You should have a strong leadership. Okay, you should not be scared away. If your hospital is, or if your institute is a COVID center, so you should be prepared to accept every patient. You should be prepared to manage all the resources. You should be prepared to answer to every person possible, and you should have a strong leadership, so that it's upon your leadership that the future patients' lives is dependent on. So strong leadership and obviously encouragement and engagement from the government will help, will benefit you for pandemic preparedness. And we have an act or an activity in India called as PPA, which is known as Pandemic Preparedness Plan and Activity. So this activity is included in the disaster management. It is included in the disaster management activity, and according to the PPA, you need an effective political leadership as well as a strong leadership from the frontline workers. So what this act is doing is it is incorporating everyone. It is incorporating the political part as well as the general mass part, because it knows that only the political people cannot make decisions. It needs to engage health workers. It needs to engage other ministries. It needs to engage all the relevant people. It needs to engage the general mass as well. So apart from a political person, a political leadership, it needs to engage health person, health ministry. So in India, the health ministry is engaged at the central level, and health ministry has appointed various nodal officers in your districts or in your talukas. So what is required? First of all, leadership and a strong political engagement, multi-stakeholder and multi-sectoral coordination. As I said, for pandemic preparedness, we need a collaboration, or we need a coordination between every sector possible. Say I want to get say 100 ventilators from Punjab. Maharashtra government wants 100 ventilators from Punjab. So here many ministries are involved. First of all, the health ministry is involved, because I am taking something of health. I'm talking something about health resources. Secondly, the state ministries of Punjab and state ministry of Maharashtra is involved. Thirdly, the transport ministry is involved, because I want to transport these ventilators as soon as possible. So I might need to I might need a say aeroplane, or I might need a truck. So the transport ministry is involved, as well as the central ministry is involved, because it has laid down some standard procedures, SOPs, which needs to be followed while transporting material. So I need to inform the central ministry as well. So these all ministries, if they do not have any communication, I would not be able to transport 100 ventilators from Punjab to Maharashtra. So multi-stakeholder and multi-sectoral coordination, command and control should be continually strengthened during the planning process. And this planning process is done before the pandemic. So these all things should be prepared. This is a preparedness. So this is the first R wala phase, that readiness wala phase. This is not the response wala phase. So the coordination should be included. The project plan which is laid, the pandemic preparedness plan and activity which has been laid, it includes multi-sectoral and multi-stakeholder collaboration. Also, as I said, the task force, which is also called as a nodal officer. So a nodal officer is one which has been appointed by the Ministry of Health, and it is responsible for all the reporting of the COVID data in your district. So he or she may form a task force, or a task force may be formed at a central level as well. And these task force have been given clear indications. So what indications it gives? That it identifies documents individual role, and thereby setting up a pandemic action mandate. So what these people do is we create a task force. Task force is basically nothing but a SWG. So there are coordinators. So the coordinators, if it is on a regional level, the task force coordinator will be the nodal officer as well as the district collector or the municipal corporation commissioner. So these are the coordinators. Then they will pick up every person from every sector, and they'll invite stakeholders such as group of hospitals, or they'll invite doctors, health workers, they'll invite police officers, they'll invite essential service people, restaurant people, and other company CEOs. And once they have a multi-sectoral coordination, they'll assign one task to every person, and thus they have, and once the task is assigned, they have to regularly report to the nodal officer and to the whoever is the chief, either the collector or the commissioner. So the task force is coordinated by 2 or at max 3 people, and the coordinators generally not employ, but they select volunteers from every sector possible, so that there is an intersector coordination, and these people are the head of their sectors usually. And once they coordinate with the nodal officers, the communication gap is bridged, and we can easily manage the pandemic. So this is the first part is over. So the readiness part, we are ready for the pandemic. We have built a multi-sectoral and multi-stakeholder coordination. Now we are ready for the pandemic. Next slide, Usha. Second, appropriate funding from the government in order to sustain the activities which is required for a good pandemic preparedness and response. So now we are coming on to the second R. We are done with the planning process. We are done with everything. But if the pandemic occurs and we do not have any funding from the government, be it a local government or a regional or a national government or a central government, we cannot work or we cannot sustain our activities. So we need appropriate funding from the governments, and that's why the task force are created. Because once the task force are created, they might give their suggestions that X sector is requiring such and such funding. Suppose the health sector is requiring a funding of 10 crores, or suppose the restaurant sector is requiring a funding of 40 crores.
20,000 40,000 था.
Okay. So such and such funding is required. So that's why the task force is created, so that they can give suggestions to the government, and the government should usually approve such fundings during the time of a pandemic. The third point, effective planning process and development of a pandemic plan at all levels. So as I said, once all your stakeholders and you identify all the sectors, you need an effective planning. Okay, we know that whatever we planned before the pandemic will go all scrap after the pandemic. We cannot predict the accurate situation. So once the pandemic kicks in, we need again for all these people to come to prepare a task force, and we need all these people to communicate again, to bridge the gaps of communication and have a multi-sectoral or a multi-sectoral meeting and develop a pandemic plan, how to go about dealing with the pandemic at all the levels. So the Pandemic Preparedness Act is not at the national level, it is integrated at the local level itself. And as I said, effective communication between healthcare professionals and all the public can be achieved by integrating communication aspects. So you might have seen that there are various apps provided by the government of India. And as Salman said, there is telecommunication which has been started by NCI. And there are various apps which are brought up by the government of India and by the local government itself. There are many COVID apps, there's a dashboard. So these apps bridge the communication, because you might have to, if these apps were not say in place, you might have to call a hospital, or you might have to call a local government body and have to ask them, what is the count of today's COVID patient? Are there any beds available? Are there any ventilators available? What medicine should I take today? So the government of India and the regional government and the local government has launched a number of helplines, a number of apps, a number of dashboards, a number of virtual reality platforms to bridge this communication and to have an effective communication between the healthcare professional and the public, because healthcare professional during the time of pandemic is the most important person. He has the most load. He is standing there on the front line, and there should not be any gap between him and the public, because he is the one who needs to know the needs of the public. That's why he's included in the task force. That's why he's included in the stakeholder meeting. And he is the healthcare professionals are the person who are frontline workers, and effective communication between these two sectors is mandated by the government of India. Next slide, please. Okay, so in summary, what capacities are required for successful implementation? So we are ready with the plan. We have all the things ready. We have also held a multi-sectoral meeting after the pandemic has kicked in. So what we need to do now? Ab kya kare? So first we need to have a SARI surveillance or a SARI surveillance or sentinel surveillance. So what is a sentinel surveillance, or what is a surveillance, or why we need routine surveillance? Because it is a pandemic. So this disease or this virus, particularly if we talk about COVID-19, is to be reported if it is being found at a clinic or at a hospital, or if a doctor is has a patient which has some symptoms. So he needs to report these patients. So we need routine surveillance, routine sentinel surveillance for severe diseases in hospitals, so that we do not miss any case. If suppose there's a pandemic of AIDS, I wish we see no pandemic after this, but suppose there's a second wave, or suppose there's another pandemic waiting for us, and we are unprepared for this, and we do not have any surveillance in the hospital. So we will risk a major amount of time, which is known as the lag time. So you must, in PSM, you must have heard the lag time and the iceberg phenomenon, and I'm talking about वो वाला part. So why surveillance is important is because you need to save that time for a patient to come, between a patient to come and for the first symptom to see. Yeah, so that is the lead time, and for the lead time you need to have a surveillance for that. So you need to survey every hospital possible for any severe disease, like say COVID. So if say a hospital nearby you does not accept any COVID patient, and by chance a patient unknowingly visits that hospital and is COVID positive, so that hospital, if it would have had surveillance, it would have been reported very earlier about that. So that's why the surveillance is important for the reporting of cases. And why reporting of cases is important, because after you report any case, we could check whether we have appropriate resources for it or not, whether we have appropriate number of doctors, whether we have appropriate number of ventilators, whether do we have the capacity to whether do we have the capacity of medicines available in our medical stores, and whether we need to increase the production cost, or whether we need to increase any production or not. So that's why we need routine surveillance, as well as we need monitoring systems. So here's an example of an influenza vaccine. So influenza, as you know, it was a pandemic before, and during that pandemic we found a vaccine for that. So once people found the vaccine, as you all know, the state of government hospitals in India, or say government clinics in India, these vaccines were not introduced or administered very safely. So one should have a monitoring system as well for the vaccine uptake, so that there are no deaths occurring due to the vaccine uptake. There is proper vaccine available for all groups of people, all the vulnerable group, all the people who in prison, all the LGBTQ people, all the disabled people, all the elderly, even common people or the middle class man. Everyone is receiving this vaccine at timely intervals. So we need a monitoring system for that. Apart from that, we need to perform a risk assessment, including the severity at the local, regional, or national level. So some might say that in Goa, or say in Arunachal Pradesh or in Ladakh, the COVID-19 curve has been achieved and there are no new cases. But in Maharashtra or in Nasik or in Punjab, there is still a high risk of COVID-19, and we see around 1,000 to 2,000 cases every day. So for that, we need risk assessment at every level, so that all the people at every level can assess what risk is at their particular level, and then report it to the central government, who then can issue an standard operating procedure guideline. Then we need, as always, as I said, we need tested information system rather than having to develop new ones during the pandemic. So we need a tested communication system, because if you develop a communication system during a pandemic, there's a high chance that it might not work, it might work, it might not work. But if you have a previous information system that is well established and you have well tested, then you can easily use that system and you can display all your guidelines over there. So we have many systems such like the Ministry of Family and Health Welfare. We have its website. We have the website of Ministry of the Home Minister. I'm sorry. We have the website of the Home Minister. We have the Prime Minister's office. We have Twitter for that. So these are some tested information systems. We have news channels. We have various websites, which are the various tested information centers and not the new ones. I might agree that yes, new ones are like more technologically suited for us, and they might provide new dashboards and everything. But these new ones are not well established as well as well tested. So you might not know what information these new information systems are passing because no one has tested them. They have been fast tracked. But using previous established information system will have you given the correct information. And lastly, have an effective healthcare workforce in which issues related to career absenteeism are absent. So what healthcare workers are, who the healthcare workers are. So doctors, nurses, all the paramedics, every person who is working in a hospital is a healthcare worker. Not only the doctors, not only the dentists, not only the physiotherapists, every person who is working in the hospital, be it a ward boy, be it a pharmac person, they are healthcare worker and they constitute the healthcare worker force. These are our frontline people. These are the force which helps us deal with the pandemic. So we should have an effective communication with them, and we should see that these people's need are being catered to, and the issue of their career absenteeisms and whatever issues they are facing are being solved ASAP, so that these people can help us fight pandemic at all levels. And we should have preparedness of pandemic at all levels. So it's not that the pandemic has started and now we are catering towards the healthcare workforce crisis or crisis of doctors. It should be before pandemic. It should be during the preparedness stage that we should attend to those crises. I guess that's it, Kusha. Yes.
Yes, that's it. Okay, guys. That's the content from our side. And if you have any questions, feel free to unmute.
Kusha, 1 second.
हाँ,
Shall I stop recording, Abhi?
yeah. Profile. Abhi, just stop. Fine.
1 second, I'll just stop it.